Big Séance Podcast, episode 46. Welcome to the Big Séance Podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance.
Don't you think? I mean, my doors don't even sound like that at home. Greetings. It's me, Meth Hazel. Remember me? I'm Patrick's witch friend. I'm centuries old, and I never seem to die. I like long walks in the woods at night, and I make a seriously fabulous witch's brew for parties. Every now and then, your host is brave enough to let me take the short trip from my cabin in the woods to stay with him for the All Hallows Eve season. It's really nice here, although his pots and pans just aren't the same as my deluxe set of cauldrons from IKEA. Ah well, Patrick likes to listen to my stories around the fire, although I'm not entirely sure that his little gas fireplace counts as a fire. But that's neither here nor there. One of the neat little parts about these visits to the studio is that I get to occasionally record these intros. It's amazing how much fancier this studio is compared to what it was last year. Jeepers. Technology these days, I tell ya. And I'm still using a Razr phone. Oh, listen to me going on and on. In today's very special Halloween episode, well, one of them anyway, Patrick has some general updates, a review of a new book about vintage Halloween, some shout-outs, and the 13 spooky movies that every paranerd should see before Halloween. And he's pulling the microphone away from me now, so I must go. Just remember, always keep a... Okay, fine, I'm going. Bye.
Oh, Meth Hazel. I just love her and her sunny disposition. Welcome to a new Halloween episode for 2015. I cannot believe that it has already been a year since the last Halloween episodes. I had several last year, and when I think about all that we've covered and talked about since then, all of the guests, all of the listeners I've gotten to know and have heard from, I kind of get a little emotional just talking about it. The experience of producing and hosting the Big Séance Podcast has been a great journey so far. Episode 1 sounds quite a bit different from episode 46, but we've grown and improved, I think, and I'm sure there's plenty of room for improvement in the future. It has been hard work, but it has been a blast. I've enjoyed every moment of it. I have a solo episode for you today, and kind of a grab bag of Halloween updates and topics. First, I wanted to make sure you saw my recent blog post at BigSeance.com. It has been a big hit so far. I received a true ghost story from an anonymous, loyal listener who just happens to be a mortician. The blog post is called Funeral Home Ghost Story. I really want to encourage you to check it out and share it with anyone who might just appreciate a fabulous ghost story in the middle of this Halloween season. And this listener is out there, and he knows who he is, and so I want to say thank you for the gift of a good ghost story. He says there's more where that came from, by the way, so I guess we'll just have to stay tuned. One of the other listeners I've heard from recently, her name is Traycee from Pennsylvania. Well, she shared a really cool photo of their Halloween home haunt. It's great. She says her and her husband love being amateur Halloween haunters. So I've included this photo in the show notes for this episode. So if you scroll down, probably in your podcast app, hopefully you'll see it there, or you can go to bigseance.com and find the link for this episode, and you'll see it there. I recently decided that it might be useful and fun to compile all of my Halloween content, and that's blog posts and podcast episodes, going back to 2013. I was recently called a giant nerd for having so many Halloween podcasts and blog posts, and I thought, you know what? Yep, and I think that's cool. So you can now easily find all of the links to that content in one place at bigseance.com/Halloween, or it's listed in the menu at bigseance.com.
Hide my coffin in the vault and guard it. Power is with me only during the hours of darkness. From dawn to dusk, I lie helpless in the grave.
Last year, after doing some research, I purchased several Halloween books, and these books were mentioned or reviewed in some form last year. But in the hubbub of Halloween and all of the excitement that comes with it, I forgot about one of the books. The name of the book is Creating Your Vintage Halloween: The Folklore, Traditions, and Some Crafty Makes by Marion, Paull. I want to tell you a little about this book. First of all, it is absolutely beautiful. Whatever you end up paying for it, and I believe it's around $20 here in the US, the money is worth the quality you get in the book. The beautiful full color pages with photos of vintage artwork, postcards, and even the new artwork has a classic vintage vibe and is beautiful. It's a hardcover. There's a cute little jack-o'-lantern bookmark attached to the book with a ribbon. I'm sure those have a name. I'm not sure what you call them. And basically, there's a mix of Halloween history and history of symbols and traditions of Halloween. But also mixed in throughout the book are ideas for creating a vintage Halloween experience and crafty instructions for different projects. Some of those projects are things like haunted house lanterns, a grinning jack-o'-lantern, caramel apples, witch costume, and there's even some homemade trick-or-treat bags. One fascinating tidbit about the author of the book, Marion Paull, is that she's from England, a part of the world that doesn't exactly have the same history or traditions of Halloween that some of us have here in the US. But according to her bio, she has long been fascinated by tales of Halloween in all its old-fashioned glory. It also states that she has a special interest in all things Celtic. And if you've listened to a few of my past podcasts about Halloween history, you know that the Halloween that many of us know has many Celtic roots. So the book does some comparing of US and UK traditions, some similarities, differences. She mentions in the book that Halloween is enjoying a revival, actually, in the UK, in Europe. And gosh, I hope that's true. How exciting. Anyway, the publisher of creating your vintage Halloween is, I think it's pronounced Chico Books or Cico Books. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but it's CICO out of London and New York. You may just want to check it out. It's not a lot of heavy reading, but it's enjoyable, very enjoyable. And like I said, very beautiful. So here we go, folks. The 13 spooky movies that I think should be on every paranerd's watch list for every year before Halloween. And I'm starting with oldest to newest here, but the first movie on my list is The Uninvited from 1944. I just love this movie, and I have probably a lot more to say about this movie. The last couple of years, I've watched it several times, and I just love it. 2 or 3 years ago, I did some research on old classic black and white spooky movies. I came across The Uninvited from 1944. Don't get it confused with newer movies and titles of the same name. Very different. I remember the night I watched it with Merrill, my 4-legged son, because we were burrowing in blankets on a chilly and windy evening at home alone. We made hot beverages. Well, I did, anyway. We lit several candles and popped in the DVD, which was recently released and remastered at that time by the Criterion Collection. The cast of this movie includes Ray Milland, Ruth Hussey, Donald Crisp, Cornelia Otis Skinner, Dorothy Stickney, Barbara Everest, Alan Napier, and Gail Russell. And there's an interesting story I have about Gail here in a little bit. For the first few times of watching The Uninvited, I got lost in the plot a little bit. I was able to refer to the very informative booklet included with the DVD. It includes several pages with photos of an essay and a 1997 interview with Lewis Allen, who was actually a first-time director for this film. The special features includes a visual essay by the filmmaker, which discussed some of the details of the film, the people involved, and it was very detailed and interesting. One of the things he mentions is how Gail Russell, who plays Stella, was plucked out of high school by the studio for her beauty, supposedly. She was horribly shy, not confident, and the stress and anxiety drove her to drinking at such a young age. And this isn't the first time we've heard about this from actresses of this generation, unfortunately. And it was the alcohol that killed her at the age of 36. Apparently, it was a common opinion, even by the director, that she was a poor actor with a studio contract who they were stuck with. Since I found her performance to be beautiful, it all surprised me. I actually kind of think that Donald Crisp, who was a respected Academy Award-winning actor by this time, I thought he had a horrible performance, and his performance actually bugged me in the movie. But it is said that at the time, he was insulted to have to work with such a newcomer with no talent and experience. And with the exception of Crisp, who doesn't play an incredibly huge role, fortunately, I think the cast is spectacular, but what do I know? I have to point out that this 1944 film did an excellent job on several scenes with incredibly spooky ectoplasmic ghost manifestations. I expected to laugh a little at the dated effects, but they really held up and are actually quite beautiful and impressive for 1944. Possibly my favorite part of the movie is it includes an original song called Stella by Starlight, which in the plot is written by one of the main characters and in real life was later arranged with lyrics and covered by many famous artists. You can find an overly dramatic but beautiful orchestral version of the score on YouTube. It is definitely not this dramatic in the film, Stella by Starlight. I love it. And I like to listen to it every now and then. I know. Nerd. Total nerd. A haunting bit of information regarding this song was shared in the special features of the DVD. Apparently in 1961, Gail Russell was known to frequently call into a particular radio station and request to hear Stella by Starlight. It is rumored that the night before she was found dead, again, apparently alcohol related, she had called in for her traditional request. How perfect is that? You really should listen to Stella by Starlight. I think you should find it on YouTube, and there's lots of versions, but for sure listen to that orchestral version or try to find a clip from the movie. It's beautiful. Like many of these old films that I like, if you require your spooky old movies to include the classic old house, a beautiful and massive one, by the way, having to use candles in place of electricity, a séance scene, which you know I enjoyed, and some really fantastic ghostly moaning, then add this to your list for sure. Next, we jump all the way from 1944 to 1960 with Psycho. And I know that probably many of you, if not most of you, have seen it. There's just something about a Hitchcock classic in black and white that gets me electrified for fall. Anthony Perkins, Janet Leigh, like I need to tell you. With the success and rise in popularity of A&E's Bates Motel series, starring Vera Farmiga from The Conjuring, the original Psycho has made it back onto the scene for lovers of this spooky genre. As a kid, I was kind of obsessed with this movie. Whether I was supposed to be watching it or not, I don't know. But a movie most known for the screeching strings and the score that, in my opinion, forever changed film music, and that horrifying shower scene. I was known to refer to it as simply Bates Motel growing up. If you haven't seen it in a while, it's time to dust this one off and give it a watch. Just be sure to shower before showtime. Next up, just 1 year later, 1961, is The Innocents, and that's INNOCENTS. Like The Uninvited, I watched and fell in love with this film for the first time a few years ago. The movie begins with a black screen and a creepy melody, and another tune that I'm going to want you to search on YouTube and listen to it. A tune called "O Willow Waly," which is sung a cappella by a young childlike voice who I believe is actually a person named Isla Cameron, and maybe I'm saying that name wrong too. I'm always determined to keep things legal here at the Big Séance, so I'm not going to play the recording here, but promise me you'll want to check it out on YouTube. There's several good clips from the movie as well. Well, much of this film is shot in beautiful outdoor garden-like settings, and the rest of the movie takes place in a beautiful large country estate. It really is beautiful to see on screen. And then, of course, later, That same beauty creates the good old-fashioned spookiness that I love in a horror movie. No special effects needed. It stars Deborah Kerr, who by this time was no stranger to movies, according to IMDb. But outside of this movie, I don't know much about Deborah Kerr. Beautiful actress, though. The storyline involves 2 children, their governess, and the ghosts of the former governess and valet who possess the children. Next on my list is another production that I probably don't have to give you much background on, and it's The Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown from 1966. When I think of Charlie Brown and The Great Pumpkin, I think of those movies that as a family, at least here in the US, we all used to watch traditionally as it was presented on television. One of the biggest examples of this kind of thing that I can think of is The Wizard of Oz, which I think at one time used to almost always be shown once a year on TV. And that's before cable. It's The Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown has the same kind of memory for me. It makes me think of the first jack-o'-lanterns that I carved with my parents as a young child in my first house, hanging the decorations around the house, those early memories. And gosh, that combo with the piano and that haunting flute, so nostalgic. Next up, several years later, about a decade, Carrie in 1976. Now, a lot of people have probably seen Carrie, but I know a lot of people that haven't seen Carrie. I know that there are a lot of people that have also just seen the remakes. Well, if you've seen the remakes and not the original, shame on you. This movie first played at screens just 2 years before I was born, but it was actually only like 8 years ago that I saw it. I've seen it many times since. The wonderful Sissy Spacek hasn't aged a day since filming it. Also, at the time, I had no idea that Betty Buckley, a Broadway star to me, was in this film. And a super creepy Piper Laurie as the mother. Remember the movie The Faculty from 1998? That was actually my first introduction to Piper. For many people, this was the first time they learned of a phenomenon called telekinesis. It's probably a movie that breaks your heart, too, when it's not trying to freak you out. Carrie has an amazing film score by Pino Donaggio that I think is really beautiful, but unfortunately, it isn't really accessible or recognized, at least that I can see. Some of the score is even uncredited in the movie. The beautiful score from the final scene that finishes with a surprise is simply genius, I think, and is one of my favorite movie themes. I don't think it is found on any albums, at least that last scene, the score, but you can find it on YouTube. I think it's called Sue's Dream, possibly. But like I said, don't waste your time with any of the remakes. They are horrible and just don't even come close to the small budget original. The Changeling is next up on my list, from 1980. This dramatic movie, starring the wonderful George C. Scott, again, has that classic spooky movie feel that I always prefer. Very rarely do I enjoy all of the computer-generated imagery or CGI of modern-day films. I get a much bigger scare out of some good sound effects, an emotional score, an incredibly spooky setting, darkness, a ball bouncing down the steps, or a secret dusty room that has been untouched for decades. This movie has all of those things. Fitting right into the subject of this podcast, The Changeling also includes a séance scene, and believe it or not, even some EVP, which surprised me for a movie from 1980. But again, creepy, huge, beautiful, old haunted house in this movie. Sensing a pattern here? Also from 1980, and I'm willing to bet that you do not know this one. It's a movie called The Watcher in the Woods. I first watched this Disney Pictures film when I was very young. Until recently, I sort of forgot about it, which is unfortunate. I was 2 years old when it was released, and I can't believe I'm old enough to mention that it stars Bette Davis, but it does. I never understood why it was the Disney company that made this film, simply because it is so incredibly creepy. Don't believe me? Watch it. I remember having nightmares about it, but it is such a good movie. This is one that I remember renting multiple times from the video store growing up. Now that ages me. Directly from IMDb, it says, when a normal American family moves into a beautiful old English house in a wooded area, strange paranormal appearances befall them in this interesting twist to the well-known haunted house tale. Their daughter Jan sees, and daughter Ellie hears, the voice of a young teenage girl who mysteriously disappeared during a total solar eclipse decades before. Trust me, check it out. And hey, it's Disney, so watch it with the kids and freak them out too. I'm kind of cheating on this next one. It's not a movie at all, but it would never not make it on this list, at least any list of mine. And I'm the boss here, which is kind of cool, so I'm adding it. And that is Roseanne's second season Halloween episode, which was titled Boo, from 1989. This is definitely fall tradition in my home. I haven't watched it yet this year, which is kind of weird, but I'll probably watch this a couple of times before Halloween gets here. And I'll say all the lines as it plays. All of the early Roseanne episodes are amazing. I know that's nerdy, and I know some people don't like it, but I do. It's totally nostalgic for me. There's even a DVD collection of just the Halloween episodes, but Boo from season 2 is the first of the Halloween episodes, and it's the greatest one of them all, I think. It just wouldn't be fall without hearing, "Welcome to the Tunnel of Terror. Please join us." Next up is Hocus Pocus from 1993. You knew this was coming. Oh, my beloved Hocus Pocus. I'm finding that I'm far from being the only nerd that enjoys the tradition of watching this film every year. As a young teenager, I loved it because it had all of the elements a spooky Halloween-themed movie needed to have: witches, spells, graveyards, a black cat. But of course, what makes this movie fabulous is the hilarious trio of Sarah Jessica Parker, Kathy Najimy, and Bette Midler. I've noticed they've begun airing it on cable a lot more than they have in the last few years. I think there for a while they were pulling back a little bit, but I usually get sucked into it every time it's offered. Several of these movies are on my list because of the nostalgia that they bring, and this one brings back feelings of the excitement I'd get as a kid around Halloween. And hey, how about that sequel that is supposedly being filmed right now? Can't wait. Okay, so pretty much the rest of the movies on my list for this episode represent my college years. At least some of the spooky movies that I would watch over and over in my apartment. That's nerdy, I know. They're also very nostalgic to me, just in a different way. So here we go. We've got Halloween H2O from 1998. And promise that you're not laughing at me. The events taking place in this film, along with the year it was released, marks 20 years after the original Halloween movie. I used to be into these old slasher movies a lot more than I am now. Don't get me wrong. If a Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, or a Michael Myers Halloween marathon catches me on the right day in October, I just might get sucked in. But even though Halloween H2O is probably on many lists for being a really horrible movie, it is my favorite of the Michael Myers films, with the possible exception of the original Halloween. It is the Halloween movies that has forever changed the meaning of the Chordettes' Mr. Sandman for me. When I hear it, it means Michael Myers. And of course, there's the unforgettable classic Halloween theme, which every podcaster wants to put in their episodes around Halloween. I like to play it legal, so I'm not going to do that here. But again, you can usually go to YouTube and find those. Next up for these college nerd years is The Blair Witch Project, 1999. Now, people often make fun of me for loving this movie. It is a movie I have often watched late on Halloween night by myself after the trick-or-treaters fizzle out. I'm not sure why, because this movie doesn't really exactly scream Halloween, but I think the improvised found footage style was groundbreaking and shocking. Several films have used this technique since. They're still dragging that technique around. If you're not familiar with this movie or the way it was filmed, it might be worth checking out a Wikipedia page that I'll link in the show notes. Then again, that might ruin it for you, especially if you haven't seen it. Watch it first and then check out the page. Though a lot of people complained about getting nauseous in the theaters due to the amateur, shaky film footage, I think they're whiners. And this film tends to have a lot of haters these days, but you know what? Sometimes I think these haters actually hide in a closet with a blanket covering their head, and they watch the movie occasionally in secret. I just know it. Next up is What Lies Beneath from 2000. Do you remember this movie? Again, college nostalgia for me. I was lucky enough to have HBO in my apartment back then, and this was shown a lot for a year or two. It's just a creepy movie with some pretty intense spirit communication, including a funny scene with a Ouija board. Right up my alley. Plus, who could forget the amazing bathtub scene with the almost drowning? Sadly, this is one of those movies that I think is becoming hard to find unless you already own the DVD or VHS, and I do not. The last movie on my list is The Others from 2001. And this movie tries to give us a glimpse into what happens when we die and what it might be like. That, of course, is probably not how Hollywood describes it, but that's the question that is pondered and brought up so many times here on the Big Séance podcast and in other paranormal circles. Again, like most of the movies from this list, it has all of the spooky elements: creepy old house, creepy children giggling, lots of darkness, and another séance scene that includes some automatic writing, super creepy automatic writing, and then the creepy old woman with the little girl's voice. Yeah, good luck sleeping after that part. Anyway, I've always thought that this was a very well-made movie. Love it. Well, there's my list of 13 movies that every paranerd needs to see before Halloween. Do you want a quick recap? So starting from the oldest to the newest, we have The Uninvited from 1944, Psycho from 1960, The Innocents, 1961, It's The Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown, 1966. Carrie, 1976. The Changeling, 1980. The Watcher in the Woods, 1980. Roseanne's second season Halloween episode titled Boo, 1989. Hocus Pocus, 1993. Halloween H2O from 1998. The Blair Witch Project, 1999. What Lies Beneath, 2000. And The Others from 2001. Well, I want to thank you for spending time with me and listening to this first Halloween episode of 2015. Next week is another special Halloween episode. I'm so excited to share it because I'll have multiple past guests back on the show to share their favorite Halloween memories and traditions. Last year's episode was a big hit, and so I definitely had to do it again this season, since we've had quite a few new guests since then. I'm also very excited to announce and premiere the first of what will be a new regular contribution to the Big Séance podcast. And that's all I'm saying about that. That'll all be next week. I can't be sure exactly when that'll go out next week. It's super busy around here and at school. Plus, I had to take time to enjoy the falling leaves and the pumpkins, and yes, those visits from Meth Hazel. But I'm working overtime to keep you in spooky new episodes before Halloween, so stay tuned. The spooky music you've been hearing throughout this episode is once again the music of the very talented Sam Haynes. He's always very kind to give me permission to use it. And along with several albums that he has out that I listen to every year, he has a new album for this year called The Incredible Dark Carnival. You should check it out on iTunes or visit the Sam Haynes site at www.hauntmusic.co.uk. Next week's Halloween. Peace out. For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com, now the home of both the blog and the podcast. Just click on the Big Séance podcast logo or find it in the menu. You can also find and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Do you have any comments or feedback? Please contact me at patrick@bigseance.com. You can call my feedback line at 7755-TELL-ME. You can also record audio feedback right from the site using the SpeakPipe link included in the show notes. I could decide to include your voice in a future show. Thank you so much for listening and reading. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time. So starting from the oldest to the nudist.